Gavin.
Hey, 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 hey. Oh, is it too early for that? Is it too...
I fucking hate... Were you planning that this entire time?
I've been planning that for at least 2 days.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow, you said, I know exactly what I'm going to do.
I
Honestly,
did.
though, first of all, congratulations. That was excellent. And number two, I love that song. So
Yeah, well, it's good. I mean...
It's a good song. Though I think maybe like my second favorite John Hughes musical number.
Oh, really?
I know.
We're gonna
who shall prevail?
We're gonna find out later, I think.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Mixed Reviews.
We are a film podcast where you take a subject such as an actor, a director, or a mini genre, and we give you a full history, like a big school exam, and then we grade it.
Oh.
We grade an A or we grade an F.
We are full. We are just overflowing, honey. This is the Golden Corral. You're going to the buffet and just getting all you can eat, hun.
But sneeze guards everywhere. Just all the most sneeze guards, please. And please stay 6 foot away.
Do you think Golden Corral will survive this?
No.
I'm surprised Golden Corral survived the yachts, to be honest. But, you know, she's been through things.
Yeah, she's seen it all.
Yeah, and so have I. Welcome, everyone. We're here. We're queer. Last time we talked to each other, Gavin, we talked about the lovely Miss Olivia de Havilland.
Very true.
I love doing those episodes because I love everyone's reaction online, just being like, "Oh my god!" Everyone just feels a little bit fancy for a little bit, you know, to dip into the waters of cinema. Classique.
We never get a message that anybody's like, I had to adjust the color on my TV. I don't understand. Why was it in black?
No, we never did. No. Thankfully. But that was a great episode, I thought.
I hated it. No, I loved it. It was great. And I do love doing those classic episodes, and we should definitely do more of them. And I hope our audience enjoys them, obviously.
Yeah, they're harder, I would say, for us for sure.
Yeah.
Just because, I mean, harder and easier, I guess. Sometimes there's like so much information. Yeah. Or, you know, the movies are harder to find. But
I had to activate all 4 interns that I have to do the research.
Yeah.
And I must say, they're very happy not to be paid.
Right. Yeah. I bet you Muffy is just like really excited to be activated.
Absolutely.
Finally.
I'm like, I'm gonna let you out of your cage. You're gonna read some Olivia de Havilland books.
We asked you guys to go online and vote for your favorite Olivia de Havilland movie. I really was hoping that I would finally like break this losing streak. And yet
you got close to getting second. You really did.
I really did. And yet somehow third. In last place was To Each His Own with 9%. Then my pick, The Snake Pit, with 14%. Somehow Gone with the Wind came in second place with 17%.
Guys.
And first of all, I don't believe that many of you have seen Gone with the Wind the entire way through, okay? I just don't believe
They've been watching it on the 4-part installments that they've been doing as the Gone with the Wind miniseries on HBO Max.
It was like Gone with the Wind, but like it's layaway plan?
Yeah, it's Zack Snyder's Gone with the Wind. It's his cut.
Okay.
He'd probably be really into that, so I don't want to put that energy out in the world.
Please, no. And then your pick, Gavin, again, The Heiress, with it trounced. 60% of people chose The Heiress, which, you know, it's a good movie. We live, we stand. But can I get something, please? Can I win?
And I will say, I love The Snake Pit. The Snake Pit is so good and such a quality performance from her that I don't know. I too was shocked, honestly. I like Melanie in Gone with the Wind, but man, oh man, she is so good in The Snake Pit.
Yeah, Miss Melly. May she rest in peace. You know, we did have some other picks. Anne said she loves Hush Hush Sweet Charlotte, which was one of her later movies,
yes.
Right? And then we also got a response for Strawberry Blonde, which we thought was very fun.
Oh, absolutely.
And just like a little sassy boots. So thank you guys for voting for your favorite Olivia movie. We will always cherish her movies. I cannot believe that I watched the entirety of Gone with the Wind. But I'm going to do it for anyone, it's for you, Gavin. Okay. But that's over. That's done with. And we can get into some other business that we have to take care of, right, Gavin?
Absolutely. Before we move into this week's subject, which we will be doing in just a moment, We have a couple new reviews, and we want to read them to you. One of them actually comes from overseas, and it's funny because this is something I just learned. iTunes does not alert us to the overseas reviews because we're in the US, and
because they built the wall.
They did build the wall. They built it. For some reason, some of the reviews are geo-blocked, but I have my ways of finding them, and we got a new one.
She's a sneaky sneak.
Oh, yeah. We got a new one from Germany, and I'm going to let Louis read it.
So the title is Can't Stop Listening. I can only guess how much time and work Gavin and Louis put into each of the entertaining and insightful episodes, but it must be insane, and I'm very thankful for it. I love taking time out of my day to listen to their witty banter and nuanced opinions. That's from Benita013 out in Germany. Thank you, Alemania. We appreciate you guys listening. And yeah, it's Gavin was just telling me how we chose a subject for this episode that was a little lighter than last time, just because we both still work day jobs and, pay bills and allegedly have personal lives.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
No one can prove that.
No.
But yeah, it is a labor of love, and we do love doing it. So thank you for sending this message. But we have another review as well, right, Gavin?
We do, and this one comes all the way from the United States of America, where we live. Title is Positive Metascore, and it says, the Mixed Reviews does something different than most film podcasts I've listened to. While others focus on films, directors, or genres, specifically, the Mixed Reviews tackles actors, actresses' careers in depth. They also throw in other movie-focused topics in older episodes for a little bit of variety, i.e. 90s superhero movies. It's informative without being overly critical or self-serious. Movie watchers need to add this show to their podcast rotation. And that's from Derelict88.
Oh my God. Okay, first of all, thank you so much for specifically shouting out our superheroes movies from the 90s. That was a super niche episode. We had a really great guest on. Who was that, Kevin?
John Hogan.
John Hogan, who was super, maybe the most prepared guest we've had. He was very cool, very funny, but also super professional. And I remember we sat at your kitchen table doing that.
We did.
And it was an afternoon. He came over in the before times.
I know. When we could see people in person. What's that like?
Yeah.
I think we all hugged. Oh my God.
Yeah, but that was, I guess, it kind of talking about us doing these older episodes with these classic film stars, and then the 90s superheroes things. It's very niche, but also very rich canon of movies. So yeah, we have a lot of fun doing those.
Absolutely.
Sometimes I love looking at our catalog and being like, you know what, we kind of are that girl. We like mixing it up. The reviews, they are mixed.
They absolutely are. Thank you, everybody, for writing in and giving us 5-star reviews. If you can, please go to Apple Podcasts, leave us a nice 5-star and a review, and we'll read it on the show. We love getting them. It helps other people find us. And yeah, it's just really nice. It's nice to hear that people appreciate what we're doing.
I know. People listen to us? What's that like, Father? Speaking of daddy issues, there's the transition.
There it is. There she is.
Yeah, speaking of daddy issues, Gavin, why don't you tell our folks what we're talking about today?
We are doing the life and career of possibly the most influential teenage film writer ever, John Hughes.
Well, he wasn't a teenage film writer.
No,
but
he wasn't a teenager, but he wrote about teenagers.
Yes. But yes, we're talking about John Hughes, who, honestly, I wish I had, a soundboard where I can just do,
yeah.
Just, all the way through this. But yeah, John Hughes, who I think just, saying his name, triggers a primal reaction in a lot of people, just because he has such a singular style, aesthetic. People know, even if you don't know, it's you're watching a movie and you're like, this movie feels like comfort. It feels like middle America.
Right.
It's
this movie feels very white.
It feels very white. And I remember when I was doing research, I was like, excuse me, he wrote the Beethoven movies? A lot of maybe not as successful kid family movies that you as a child watched. I remember watching Dennis the Menace all the time, and I didn't rewatch it for this, but I was like, yeah, that makes sense that he did that. Flubber, same. I had that VHS, honey.
Baby's Day Out. huge
Oh,
Baby's Day Out fan, were you?
yes, I was. I was shocked to hear people didn't like it. I was like, that baby was going on an adventure, honey. Um, but yeah, we chose John Hughes. I brought him up maybe like 2 episodes ago in like conversation about who we were going to talk about. I think I had first brought up John Candy, and then
Still could come. Still
could come. And then we saw she's having a baby in our Kevin Bacon episode, and so he's been on the periphery, and then we were kind of stuck, and you were like, why don't we do that John Hughes episode that you suggested?
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah.
And I feel like it came at sort of a perfect time. I mean, we're right at the cusp of fall. The leaves are changing. The kids are going back to school virtually, I hope. Please don't make this pandemic last longer than it is. And I think there is that sense that comes along with John Hughes, though, funny enough, he only made like 5 teenage films.
Yeah.
But those, all 5 seem to be canon, or at least 4. And it's such an interesting thing to, I equate him with like sweaters and hats and this very like 80s, like you said, Midwestern feel, this home style. I came from a small town upstate, it all had that feel.
Well, it feels like, I mean, I was born and raised on a border town in Texas, and watching his movies like Home Alone, and we're using like kind of this universal his movies to kind of cover like things he wrote and directed. He did not direct Flubber or a bunch of these movies I mentioned, but he wrote a lot of them, produced a lot of them, directed I think 8 of them. But all I have to say, I'm using his movies very loosely. But like Home Alone, Breakfast Club, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, like all that stuff, it felt like, and this is weird, like in my head, I was like, oh, this is what real America looks like. This is what like, fancy rich people do. And maybe that's why I had such a visceral reaction when we were doing Catherine O'Hara and I was rewatching Home Alone, and I was like feeling very resentful. I was like, how dare Home Alone 2 make me feel like, corporate America is the real America. But yeah, I agree. I think like high school in my brain always feels super heightened during the fall semester season, whatever. Just because, I don't know, like you're cozy and cold and studying, and, it's like the peak of football season also. And yeah, I think we're going to talk a lot about maybe some romanticism, nostalgia, whether that like has held up or not. I think there are definitely a lot of missteps and fuck ups and things that I think that are not good about John Hughes and his movies, which sucks to say, because it's almost like, the curtain has been pulled back. Like the rewatching and being like, oh, that is racist as fuck. And I cannot believe that, a lot of like gay F words in the movies. Like,
there's a lot of, there's a lot of casual racism. There's a lot of casual homophobia. There's more than its fair share of casual sexism, which is funny because I think the thing that John Hughes is most good at, surprisingly, is writing central female characters. But there is a lack of awareness of they come from a very male place,
right? And it's almost as if like John Hughes is coming from, a lot of his movies, especially those teen movies, are all about like being an outsider, being the outcast, and feeling that you could be that way no matter who you are. But like what a privilege to think that you're like, all these cis white people have problems because their parents are mean or whatever, and like not even considering what maybe a queer person would be going through or a black or brown person would be going through, and so it's kind of like laughable. Like now watching these movies, it's like, oh my god, like I do know that being a teen sucks and like you feel everything, but this guy's trying to tell me that like, oh no, I'm rich, my parents, well, like it's very that. And
it kind of reminds me, and I've brought this up before on other occasions, but if you go back to our queer cinema episode, there's a great quote from Harvey Firestein from The Celluloid Closet about his writing, you know, people coming and telling him that his writing feels universal, and he's like, no, it's not universal, it's queer, and you have to do the translation like I've had to do with them. And I've read things from queer people, from Black people, saying how much they've been able to sort of imprint themselves on these movies, or find the characters that would be them, but also like that's them having to do the translation.
Absolutely.
And it's not there.
And what's wild is, like, you know, because he has, there was something I read, I think it was I posted a couple articles on our Facebook page. One is behind a paywall from the New York Times, but if you have a Times subscription, you should read it. It's from their magazine back in 91. And they ask him about, like, all of his central characters, and I would argue all of them are white, except for maybe, like, Long Duck Dong. And that's fucking racist.
Right.
And he says something to the effect of, like, the Lena Dunham response of, like, I wouldn't dare to think that I knew the Black experience. And I'm like, this man doesn't think that, like, Black and brown kids have the same experiences as, like, being nerds at school. Like, what the fuck? And so, and what's even wilder is he even admits and says that is a spot that I need to work on, and hopefully I'm getting better at it, la 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 la. Unfortunately, or I don't know what the fuck, this was towards the end of his career and he retired or whatever. So,
and we're going to get to all of that. Before we do, why don't we move into the rewind?
John Weldon Hughes Jr., he is the second John Hughes, and there is a third. He had a son, John Hughes III. He was born February 18th, 1950, and he died August 6th, 2009. He was 59, and he had a heart attack in New York. Super sad. But he was born in Michigan, actually. He has 3 sisters. He, I believe, is the second eldest child. They grew up in Grosse Pointe, Michigan. His mom was, like, just a homemaker. She volunteered. And his dad, John Hughes Sr., was a salesman. They moved to the suburbs of Chicago when he was, like, 13. And that's kind of where he, you know, the roots, the beginnings, the seeds of teen angst and such started taking root.
I grew up in Grosse Pointe, Michigan, which is a lot of automobile money. And my father didn't own the automobile company. He worked for the automobile company. We lived on the fringe. And I had all these people, I mean, I knew kids that would, you know, in 3rd grade would say, when I'm 18, I'm getting $22 million. You know, I mean, I was just, it always bothered me. Not that they were getting it, I wasn't. But, I don't know, I just, you know, I always had a problem with that.
He literally meets his future wife in high school, like his life...
totally casual, totally.
Yeah, like his life is a fucking movie. His future wife, Nancy, who was a cheerleader, NBD. And this is funny because I think when we get later into his future, everyone's like, oh my God, John must have been like an outsider, outcast. He's writing what he knows. And it's like, no, bitch, he married the cheerleader from high school. He was fine. He found movies as an escape. He was a very creative kid. And his parents, especially his dad, criticized him a lot. And we'll see this running throughout a lot of his movies about how, you know, art isn't work and you can't make a living off of art, and you have to always think about, you know, the actual plan for life. How are you going to support yourself and your family?
Outside of a few instances when it comes to his films in which there are teens, adults are monsters.
Yeah,
genuine
worst.
Monsters.
Dream crushers.
I think 16 Candles stands out, and honestly, the only reason it stands out is because Paul Dooley, who was cast as the father, turned down the role because there wasn't enough meat for the character, and he wrote that great scene when he realizes he's missed his daughter's birthday, and then Carolyn Glynn, who played the mother, confronted him on set about the fact that she never realizes that she forgot her daughter's birthday, so he had to write that scene for her. So I feel like the only time his parents get a redeeming value is under duress.
Right. So he, you know, is feeling, you know, pressure and criticism from his parents about what he wanted to do in his life. He was a huge music nerd, loved the Beatles, and he also was just like a carnivore of films. Like he was just like intaking all this stuff. He decides to go to art school, but at the University of Arizona, which was not a good fit for him. He quickly drops out. Also, he literally is already married. He is now married. He's a married teenager. And he moves back to Chicago and he begins selling jokes to like comedians. He's literally just cold pitching, writing jokes, putting them in an envelope and mailing them out.
He's sending them out to people like Rodney Dangerfield, Joan Rivers, Johnny Carson, and he's occasionally getting some traction, but these jokes are being paid for like $5, $10 a joke.
Right. It's not going to pay the bills. And so he ends up getting an ad job in Chicago. And, you know, it's like he's kind of being creative by creating these advertisements for these companies, but it's like he's making commercials for like Corn Pops and like shaving cream. And
yeah,
I think
though he does get one really famous one, which is the credit card like shaved
the edge.
The edge of the credit card shaving so close to the skin.
His biggest work or account was for Virginia Slims. His bosses at the ad agency loved him. You know, he was very creative. He was making these commercials that were big successes. But so the Virginia Slims account, though, allowed him to travel to New York a lot, which I was reading up on him after I watched Planes, Trains, and Automobiles, and I was like, what the fuck is this guy doing flying from New York to Chicago for this stupid job? And I was like, oh, that was his life.
That was his life, exactly. Right, what you know. Sorry, kidding.
Basically. But so when he was in New York, though, he would get a little cozy with the editors of the National Lampoon magazine.
I was just working to be accepted as a writer, which I, never thought. I mean, everybody in my family's always been like a generic businessman, like you wear one of those white suits with a brown stripe down it that says businessman in block letters, So anything, creative was, you could be an advertising executive. That was acceptable because you wore a tie and you went to a job and you worked for a company and you sold products, but you were able to think up stuff and be creative. So it took me a long time to accept the fact that I was actually earning a living as a writer.
Now, Gavin, I don't know a lot about National Lampoon. I obviously know that it was a magazine. I know it made movies, but like, are you familiar with like how were they like super lit? Like, was it like the place to be at the time?
It was considered like a really hip thing to be involved with. I mean, National Lampoon was a very, very funny magazine, and it had a lot of top writers working at it at the time. But it was also like kind of very loosey-goosey. Do your own thing. There were drugs. It's a lot like if you've ever read that book about SNL's early histories and the writers are on drugs, it's that sort of situation. And I think also just in general, this was sort of his dream. He wanted to be funny. He wanted to be recognized for that.
So when I moved to the Lampoon, it was something that I turned 29. I was about to turn 29, and I realized that if I didn't move soon, I'd be so deeply entrenched in, corporate business life and, country club memberships and all that sort of stuff that it'd be very difficult to leave. As it was kind of financially irresponsible. I had a 3-year-old son and a pregnant wife and a new house, and, I went off to be an editor for like a salary that was somewhat less than my Christmas bonus, But we had a big snowstorm in Chicago, and I got to stay home for about 10 days and just write. And it was so much fun doing that. I said, I can't go back and write commercials anymore. So I made the jump. I gave myself 3 years, and I figured that that I could go back in failure, defeat. But if I didn't try it, then I dreaded like being 75 in a nursing home somewhere, saying, I should have. And then I went to the Lampoon and wrote incredibly horrible humor stuff. Quite a change from writing Kellogg's commercials to some of the things I did at the Lampoon. But it was a liberating experience.
The funny thing is I hit this point in his history during the research process and was like, cool, whatever. This leads to movies. I didn't investigate any further, but Molly Ringwald did. And after he passed away a couple years ago, she wrote an article for the New Yorker, sort of revisiting his films, especially in the Me Too era. And I gotta say, a lot of these stories he wrote, I mean, some of his great work comes from them. Mr. Mom comes from an article he wrote for that. Vacation comes from Vacation 58, which is a story he wrote for that. But he also wrote these stories about teenagers, one called My Penis and one called My Vagina. My Penis is about a girl who wakes up with a penis, and as Molly Ringwald describes it, she then forces her boyfriend to blow her. And the My Vagina is about a boy who wakes up with a vagina and he gets gang raped by his friends and ends up having to spend his yeah, exactly. Ends up having to spend like the money that he saved for ski poles on an abortion. I mean, I know the 70s was like kind of a wild and crazy time for comedy, but they sound tasteless, and I'm kind of happy that like people take into consideration other people's. I know what people are like. Oh, well, there's no boundaries when it comes to comedy. If you get offended, that's on you. And it's like, no, there is an element of taste and class, and comedy doesn't work if it's constantly punching down.
It's almost absolutely yes. It's almost like I'm not even like offended. I'm just like disappointed.
Right.
Like, or it's kind of like
I too am in mom mode.
Yeah, it's kind of correct. It's almost like, oh well, no wonder there's nary a gay to be found in his films. Like it's, and I keep thinking about that. Like he writes about like these. We'll get to this. But he writes about being an outsider, but it's like he is a white man from like a pretty like, and he said, his family was pretty like upper middle class. There's 4 kids. The mom doesn't work. It's like they were fine.
Right.
And yet the turmoil he is getting is like, that he was feeling criticized by his parents, even though like in the end he did go to art school.
Right.
It's not anyone's fault that he dropped out. Like, I don't know why I couldn't find anywhere why he chose University of Arizona.
And there's also this element of class struggle in a lot of his work. We're going to probably get further into this in a moment, but his editor at National Lampoon was P.J. O'Rourke, who is conservative. And he has said as
what I love, Gavin? Just conservative comedians.
I know. Oh, I know.
So funny. La 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 la.
And then you also get, his friend Ben Stein, who ends up in a lot of his movies, who was a speechwriter for Nixon. Both of them have confirmed on a couple different occasions that he was a conservative Republican, and he just didn't like to talk about it in interviews. And I think it's hard to parse when you look at the surface level of his work, and you're like, a lot of his films are about teenage rebellion, and that doesn't really go alongside with the idea of, conservative politics. But I think all the things we're saying kind of leads you to believe that there's another way of looking at this that's beyond the surface level.
Correct. So he's working, at first he's just like on the side doing, Lampoon stuff, and then he even, I think I read somewhere that he literally would go to work at the ad agency and he would leave coffee on his desk and then go to fucking New York for the day, and people just thought he was like in the restroom or whatever, and then come back at the end of the day. Like, that's some fucking like Ferris Bueller antics shit. He's now on staff at the magazine, and after the success of Animal House, all of a sudden Hollywood is knock knock a knockin', and just trying to find the next Animal House. I think like Mr. Mom comes out of something different.
He writes the script, and then he's kind of
right. And that's in the moment when he realizes like, oh, I don't like my shit being like fucked with by other people. And so and we talked about that during our Michael Keaton episode.
Feel free to listen to our Michael Keaton episode with great guest Christy Puchko.
Lovely guest. He also not like, he didn't even know this, but essentially Paramount is like, oh, Vacation 58. Like, they picked that up and decided to make that into a movie. And after some flops in the National Lampoon wheelhouse, Vacation,
including his first scripted one, which is National Lampoon's Class Reunion. Yes. I watched this. Nary a joke lands.
Vacation 58. I thought I had seen this movie, but surprise, the one that I was thinking of was Vegas Vacation was what I was thinking of.
Sorry.
So
I don't mean to laugh, but
and yet, you know what? I remember same thing. Like, a lot of these movies, I just remember watching them as kids and being like, "Oh my god, this is the best!" And like, I thought Vegas Vacation was like so funny and like, I don't know. But anyway, so
Vegas Vacation is one of the two that he didn't have anything to do with. Because European Vacation and Vegas Vacation are the two that, because he wrote Christmas Vacation, because that's also based off another real experience. But
so Vacation, starring Chevy Chase, and a tiny little I always get his fucking name on,
Anthony Michael Hall.
Anthony Michael. I always want to call him Michael C. Hall, but I know that's not right. That's Dexter.
I was going to say those are different serial killers.
Mm-hmm.
Kidding. We know you're not a serial killer, Anthony Michael Hall. Please stop calling me.
knock. The tiniest little Anthony Michael Hall. Also the tiniest little Jane Krakowski.
Yeah.
But that movie is very racist. I don't know.
I'm nodding along.
Do you? Did I enjoy the film? No. But it is a big hit.
It's a huge hit.
People love it. I mean, so here's the thing that I think about for when I quickly realized when I was rewatching some of these movies or watching some for the first time, I was like, his movies are like fables and they should be like, or fairy tales. They should be treated as such. There is going to be like unrealistic nonsense that goes on. So you have to just like let that go. But that's part of the like fun and whimsy of it all. But like, it's hard to make whimsy out of like, oh no, we took the wrong street and now we're in like downtown St. Louis and all these black people are scary. Like, that's not whimsy. That's just ignorance and stupidity. and also like, when you think about like, through a conservative lens, like, of course, that's what they're like, fucking pumping through. Like, that's Trump rhetoric, like the streets are burning, like, blah.
Right. And it's funny because once again, I guess this is the time to bring it up. A lot of his stuff is based on nostalgia, right? A lot of the things that he's talking about in his movies, a lot of the things, and we're going to be talking about more of his movies. And I know we're right on the cusp of it. And I know some of you are just here to hear about the teen movies, and we're going to get there. But I think, in a way, nostalgia's prison, and you're not wrong, bitch. And I think that his movies, though contemporary for the time in which they came out, hip because he was an avid music lover, and but the politics and, as you mentioned, the like fairy taleistic idealist plots feel like they're ripped from another time period.
Yeah.
And I think that it's strange because our nostalgia for his movies and the time in which his movies exist come from his nostalgia for a time in which he grew up and he existed. And it's this weird perpetual cycle. And I don't know, because it's always happens in time in general. You look at the 70s, there's a huge like resurgence of the 1950s and the 70s. You look at the 90s, there's a huge resurgence of the 60s and the 90s. And I think that it's this almost never-ending cycle when you have these 30-year-old or mid-30-year-old white men dictating the stories to you. The stories you're going to get are from their perspective, even if it's not as clear as being like, my main character's a 30-year-old white man.
Yeah. And I think we'll get to like a lot of the things that his characters do. It's like, would a black person be able to get away with that?
Right.
Probably not. Anyway, so he notoriously is a super fast writer, would write his scripts like in days. So, he would sometimes be working on a script and then like stop to take a break and then literally finish another script and like pumping them out.
I was used to magazine writing, which was nonstop, constant deadline. So when I started writing scripts, I applied those same things, the same sort of deadlines and pressure writing that I did in the magazine business and in the advertising business before that. And I just started grinding these scripts out, and they, one after the other, they're getting made.
After Mr. Mom, he got a 3-film deal with Universal Pictures, and so he was writing, and he writes The Breakfast Club first. It's first called Detention, and he is thinking like and because he is also so protective and wants all this control, he is trying to finance these films independently from the studios.
When they say, okay, what I'd like here is right after here, move this scene over here and put this in and then add this guy. And I mean, me personally, I lose, I'm sort of like a bird, and the script is the baby, and if somebody touches it too much, you have to kick it out of the nest, because it gets other people's imprint on it, and I don't see it the same anymore. So working with spec scripts, I don't have to do that. I can just say, here it is, and I think it's fair. I think it's, it's good, it's regular business, I mean, here's a script, you like it, you're not, and this is the way it's going to be.
And so he's thinking like, how can I write something on the cheap or make a movie on the cheap? And he thinks, well, something in one room, 5 actors, get it done. And so that's where Breakfast Club comes from. But while literally, like I said, he's writing that and, it's going through the Hollywood bullshit, he writes 16 Candles.
Yeah.
And 16 Candles ends up being made first. And I guess this is also the time we should bring up his first muse, Miss Molly Ringwald, comes into the picture.
Yeah, the legend is that while casting for Detention, he sees her and he like puts her picture up on his corkboard above where he writes, and he writes 16 Candles for her. And when Universal's like, we like this script better, let's do this first, he's like, cool, we're casting her.
16 Candles is about this girl whose family has forgotten it's her birthday and her sister is going to get married the next day. Yeah. It's also, again, he liked Anthony Michael Hall so much in Vacation. He just wants to cast him as the geek who is obsessed, like kind of just like really obnoxious. He's a freshman character who's trying to, get off.
Yeah. He's just a walking hard on.
16 Candles, I mean, and it's huge. People, flip for it. It's, and Jake Ryan, he literally cast a male model.
Yeah.
Who was like able, and I will say, like, I don't know who this model person is, but like he definitely exudes the like, yeah, I'm like mask, but like, I don't know, like there's something about me, But this is also the movie where we get Long Duck Dong. Who is a Chinese foreign exchange student, played by a Japanese American actor. There's a gong that hits every time they say his name. It's very like, what's with the weird kid?
Right.
And he's literally only used to like be like a sexual pervert. John Hughes has said that like he wrote this character because his grandparents loved having foreign exchange students because they thought that they had more respect for elders and they were better than American kids. And so he wanted to subvert that and show how once the foreign exchange kid is out of the eyesight of the American, parents, they get fucking lit and wild and blah, 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 blah.
Long Duck Dong is about your age, Sam. You two should have a lot to chat about.
I love visiting with the grandma and the grandpa and writing letters to parents and pushing lawn mowing machine so grandpa's hyena don't get disturbed.
Hernia!
Oh, yes, indeed. He does the dishes and helps with the laundry, you betcha.
May I be excused? Where are you going?
I have a dance to go to at school.
I have a wonderful idea. Would you like to go to the dance with Sam?
He says that Getty Watanabe understood that, was on board, but I'm like, sis, what the fuck is he supposed to say?
I mean, yeah, exactly. He can say that all he wants, but Getty Watanabe has also said that John Hughes didn't know for the first week that he wasn't foreign at all because he was just doing the accent. Like a week later, he had to be like, I'm from Utah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
like, and it's not even like, it's a South Korean accent. So like,
right. I think 16 Candles, though, is mostly successful because of Molly Ringwald's performance.
Yeah.
I think she is such a good avatar for, forgotten youth, like kind of, she's wandering and she's like a little salty about it. Of course, who wouldn't be?
Yeah.
But she has a good head on her shoulders. And the movie, like the solar system around her of fucking freaks, and she's like the only normal human being, and she's like, what the fuck is going on? And that's kind of why you immediately connect with her.
I'll be honest, I hadn't seen this movie since I was very young, and I didn't really like it this time, but I will say the thing I appreciated the most was how sort of undefined she was as a high schooler. You will see in his later films that like everybody gets much more categorized and everybody like stays specifically within their cliques, and she didn't seem to have that. She seemed much more free floating and just sort of and every person. By the way, the reverse of that, Anthony Michael Hall's character, who's just a complete outcast, and nobody. We've also not even touched on, and we're not going to make this whole podcast about 16 Candles, but he date rapes a girl at the end of the movie. It's implied something happened, but it's okay because she enjoyed it.
I was wondering about the ending of the movie because I was like, he does take her. They don't show like them doing, like, she's very fucked up, this girl, and by
the
movie,
way,
like,
played by Havlin Morris, who is great in that role.
I was like, oh no, this is gonna go to a very dark place. It doesn't like lean into like the darkness as much as I thought it was going to. He does take her home, and she kind of like it's a morally, ethically sticky,
area.
Gross.
She's also mentioned in that article Molly Ringwald wrote because she like met her for coffee and she was kind of like, well, I never thought of it that way, and like I don't think it's meant to be, and then emailed her later and she's like, actually it's a little uncomfortable that like Jake Ryan trades his girlfriend who is blackout drunk for a pair of panties, and he's the hero. Yeah.
It's Ruth Stoof.
Yeah.
But it's a success. It's a hit.
Yeah.
And I will say, like, we're just being critical because we have to be. The movie definitely, it's set the groundwork for this like teen fantasia. The girl gets the guy in the end.
Right.
There's the scene with the cake.
And the thing it does too that other films weren't doing at the time is you basically had two polar ends of the teenage film. You had after school specials, which no teen would be caught watching because they were all about moral and they weren't plugged into what teens liked. And then you had things like Porky's, which were like teen sex comedies where the women are even more paper thin. The men are all idiots. And so he's able to find the middle ground because while his films might not be exactly moral, they do treat these teenagers like people, and it centers their world, even though once again some of the drama isn't exactly life altering. I mean, 16 Candles is a movie about a girl whose parents forget her birthday. Pretty in Pink's about a girl who wants to go to prom. That these are not going to change the universe, but they treat these subjects in a serious way that kids at the time are thinking about them in such a manner.
Also, those two specific examples, when you're that age, it is the end of the world.
It is the end of the world.
It matters. And so to have someone treated as such was such like an aha moment. Like, holy fuck, this guy isn't talking about like, oh no, I did drugs and then I died, or like, or whatever bullshit, adults thought was happening. It was literally as simple as, remember me think about me. You know, don't leave me alone. Like that.
Right.
It's that simple.
And I'm just real true to those feelings. I mean, you know, what it's like to feel completely grown up, completely capable of being responsible for yourself, and having someone saying, in the midst of all of your problems, what time are you going to be home for dinner? I mean, I remember that stuff, you know, or not being given credit for the scope of a problem. And your father would say, 3 years from now you'll laugh about it. Well, you're not laughing right now.
After 16 Candles blows up, they make the Breakfast Club, which might be like the zenith of, and this is crazy to say, but like I think it's his definitive movie.
Yeah.
And he casts, he says, we're having Molly again and we're having Anthony again. They will be in it.
Yeah. And he also casts Ali Sheedy, who he had met during the casting process for Pretty in Pink, and was like, she's not right for any of this, but I'll keep her in mind.
Yeah, I need her. She's coming later. And so he makes Breakfast Club, and it's, you know, it pops off. People love it. It, you know, blows up. It's like you said, the labels. Everyone has a specific thing.
The jock, the geek, the criminal,
the basket case,
the princess. We got them all. We won this round of trivia.
It's like we all have a thing, except we're the same. You're welcome.
Yeah.
And so it was like, what was after that? He said after that was Pretty in Pink, right?
Yeah. But he decided Pretty in Pink that he wasn't going to direct because he was going to put all of his effort into Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which is another script he wrote in like 24 hours. Right.
And I think that's kind of becomes like the thing. He will do like 2 movies a year, and then like a third he'll like give off to someone else. Right. So
can we talk a little bit about the culture around these movies behind the scenes? So essentially, he puts himself in the position where he's once again a mid-30s man. He puts himself in this position where he becomes actively friends with Anthony Michael Hall, and
some of these things I read, I was like, suspicious behavior.
Yeah,
that
and Molly
would not
Ringwald.
Fly.
Yeah,
that
nowadays it'd be like, don't you dare. Right. But he was like taking them out to clubs and or like going over and playing board games with them and stuff. And you absolutely have to remember, Molly Ringwald and Anthony Michael Hall were the age of their characters. They were 16. Yeah. And unfortunately, the Breakfast Club becomes sort of the nearing of the end of their relationship, because the Breakfast Club, around that time, Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald start dating. And Molly Ringwald says that was maybe the first bit where he was like,
he said, what the fuck are you doing?
Yeah. And as she said, it was the first time they'd gone off script with him. And then
gaslighter, denier.
And then I don't know how much further we're going to go into The Breakfast Club, because I feel like it's a movie that everybody's seen, and there's all the only thing I will say about The Breakfast Club in terms of filmmaking is he shot so much for it.
Right.
The studio was very angry at him. He was going over budget. You know, he would load the camera up and it just shoot, and he would never call cut.
The big confrontation scene at the end was 200,000 feet of film. I shot 5 actors, 4 sizes, 2 masters, 20-minute scenes, you know, 2 full magazines on each size on each character. And I wouldn't interrupt them. If they screwed up, we'd just keep going. They'd get their composure back and go. I just never cut, you know. And I mean, if we started every shot with a full magazine, because I'd end the scene and then I'd just sit there.
And you can tell though, because like some of the shots, the detail shots of them, just like, you know, the iconic, I mean, a lot of shots in that movie are iconic, but like Emilio Estevez just like looking at his little like strings from his shirt, like making sandwich, like these little details. That movie is made on details. Absolutely. And so you understand these characters through, you know, their little like idiosyncratic moments.
And just so you know, we're not being, incredibly negative, that movie's an actor's dream. And what's interesting is we talked about how he was very controlling about his script. The reason he even went into directing, and I've heard from a lot of in my research process from a lot of the people that worked with him, he wasn't really interested in directing, more so than he just wanted to protect his words. He was
right.
But
he wasn't precious about it, though.
Exactly.
And I could not believe, Gavin.
I could not believe it either.
When I heard him say, he was like, I think the actors are the most important persons on the set, I was like, oh my God, I never have heard a filmmaker say that in my life.
To me, the actor's the most important thing on the set. It really starts with the actor. I mean, you protect the script, through pre-production, through production. The script and the actors are like, sacred. And I give them a lot of freedom. I like their ideas. I like their input. They're all. If you don't ask them for something, you're not going to get anything. And it's very easy for me to say no. What I like to do in rehearsals is let them have, say anything they want, challenge me, confront me, and then once we're shooting, we know pretty much what we want to do. And if something comes up, if somebody has an idea and they want to try it, it's really easy for me to say, I don't think that's going to work.
I think Detention / Breakfast Club went through 17 rewrites, and then in the end, like in the room, it didn't matter anyway because they were figuring stuff out as they were going along.
But I feel like The Breakfast Club, even though it's the beginning, is also sort of the end of his working relationship, because you're really starting to see, unfortunately, who John Hughes is as a friend, because Anthony Michael Hall, both Anthony Michael Hall and Molly Ringwald go on to do his next two films, Pretty in Pink
and Weird Science.
Anthony Michael Hall plays the lead in that. He's a nerd, and then Pretty in Pink, Molly Ringwald goes off and she's a girl and she's caught in this love triangle. Right. We're going to talk about them more in a moment, but just the behind the scenes stuff. So then the next project, when Pretty in Pink is in casting, John Hughes is like, great, you just did Weird Science. I want you to play Ducky in Pretty in Pink. And Anthony Michael Hall responds with, well, this is a redundancy issue. I don't want to keep playing this character. And John Hughes never speaks to him again.
Whew.
And then the same thing ends up sort of happening for Pretty in Pink. He begins casting Ferris Bueller. Molly Ringwald gets on the cover of Time magazine. And she's like, I kind of want to spread out and do other things, and I don't want to keep playing this role, because she was going to play Sloane in Ferris Bueller's Day Off. She turns that role down, and he basically never speaks to her again either. And these were friends. These were people that, as a mid-30s man, was hanging out with these 16-year-olds.
Yeah, he was inviting them over to his house.
I can't imagine writing off children.
Yeah. He said, you think you're the only fucking one out there? I made you and I can destroy you. So Weird Science, we can talk about, because he did direct that. That was the same year as Breakfast Club. This is 1985. And Weird Science is kind of like, now we're focusing solely on these two virginal nerds who really just want to get off, and instead they like use the burgeoning world of the internet to create a woman. For all you internet Tumblr gays, this is where we get the gif of like the guy wearing the woman's underwear and the crop top, and it's very hot. But it's a joke. This movie is weird. I don't understand what the message is. I at the end, it's kind of like the woman being like, you need to stand up to bullies. And then that's it. I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I mean, it's 100% a wish fulfillment film. I mean, essentially what they do, they're attempting to create a woman. They actually create a genie, essentially, and she's this sort of otherworldly. She's Kelly LeBrock, and she's actually, I didn't love the movie, but she's amazing in it.
She's gorgeous.
I think she's actually very good too. And like, she has to do some really embarrassing stuff. I mean, and it sounds like maybe the set atmosphere was, I'm sure it was fine, but also maybe not the world's greatest. Ian Mitchell Smith, who plays the other boy in it, he he plays Wyatt. He was 14 at the time, and there's a scene where they kiss, and he like shoved his tongue down her throat, and
God.
she had to explain to him that like if he did that again, she would murder him. She didn't care how what it did to the film.
Good for her.
Yeah, and so like I don't know. I think she puts in a really good performance for a kind of a very
It's
masculine,
very immature.
yeah, a very male gazy role.
Right. It's like, okay, well, if nostalgia is a prison, so is masculinity. Here's the movie. It's like literally like them and like Robert Downey Jr. looking at a computer like, make her boobs bigger. Like, okay.
They forgot to hook up the Barbie.
They had to, yeah. Okay, and then Pretty in Pink comes out in 86.
Directed by Howard Deutsch.
Howard Deutsch, who was his like little... He gave him the movies.
Yeah.
He trusted him. Pretty in Pink, which I had never seen. There are some genuinely fun moments, but the role of Ducky is the fucking craziest thing I have ever seen in a film before.
He's terrible.
It's what's funny is I realized, wait, this isn't the movie with the painter. That's Some Kind of Wonderful.
That's Some Kind of Wonderful, which is a remake of this, essentially.
Yeah, it is. Because it's like, all I could think of was Not Another Teen Movie and having a better appreciation for that movie. It gets funnier and funnier the more you know.
It really does. You know, you're not wrong. You know what's funny too about Some Kind of Wonderful is that Pretty in Pink. Just to give a description, Pretty in Pink is a movie about a girl named Andy who is from the wrong sides of the track. She's from the poor side, and she falls in love with Blaine, who's a rich guy.
This is the class warfare John Hughes movie.
And she has this friend who is also from the poor side named Ducky, John Cryer. And I want to put friend loosely because everything is always like her best friend. There is nothing in the movie that says he's her best friend. He is the worst person in her life. He is constantly just there's a scene where he like toxically calls her over and over and over again.
Yes.
I can't believe you'd be this stupid.
Who's shitting on me? I'm not gonna let anybody shit on me.
He's gonna use your ass and throw you away. God, I would have died for you.
So what am I supposed to do? He asked me out and I like him. If I hate him because he's got money, just listen to me. If I hate him because he's got money, that's the exact same thing as them hating us because we don't. Do you understand?
You can't do this and respect yourself. You can't.
Well, I'll make that decision, all right?
Sure, you can do what you want.
You know, you're talking like that just because I'm going out with Blaine.
Blaine? His name is Blaine? Oh, that's a major appliance. That's not a name.
And then in the next scene, she's like, you know I love you, right? And I was like, this is incel starting behavior. This is why incels exist, because they think that is reality. I was like, there is no woman, there's no girl, any age, who is like, you know I love you, right? When you call me every 2 minutes.
And, the famous thing about this movie is in the original ending, she ends up with Ducky, who she has no chemistry with, but whatever. She ends up with Ducky. Test audiences hated it. They reshot the movie. They brought Andrew McCarthy back, who was apparently on Broadway at the time, had lost 20 pounds and shaved his head. So you can see the lace when he's confronting
oh my God.
Andy at the end of the movie. And they reshot it so she ends up with Blaine, which, by the way, as awful as that's going to make me sound, like, except for what he says to her, because he's like, I always believed in you. You just didn't believe in me. Like, fuck that. No, I think if I were to make the ending of that movie, she wouldn't end up with anybody. She'd go to prom and she'd tell them both to fuck off.
I think it makes sense that she ends up with him. She clearly has more chemistry with him, even though the tension of that movie is very loosey-goosey. It's like, I don't know, would you like date a rich person? It's like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, and also they like want us to believe that they're like really fucking poor. And yet Ducky is like, they show Ducky literally in a room with like just a mattress and it's like a derelict. And I was like, what are you talking about? This man like is going to school and hanging out. They go to bars. They are hanging out at clubs where musicians are playing. I was like, bitch, that was a $25 cover. Don't tell me otherwise.
And I'm going to get to Some Kind of Wonderful in a minute, because I know I started by saying that. But speaking of the club, Ducky, it's like an underage club nonetheless.
Right.
But Ducky is too young to get into the underage club. And yet there's a scene later in the movie where he kisses Annie Potts.
Yeah.
And Annie Potts is like, I'm old enough to be his mother, but I felt something.
So wild. So wild.
And I think, honestly, in all of these movies, the biggest stand-in for John Hughes, and I'm not claiming that he wanted to sleep with these kids. Please don't take me out of context. But I think the biggest stand-in for John Hughes in any of these movies is Annie Potts' character in Pretty in Pink. Because she is this older woman who's obsessed with music. She's hanging out with these young kids. She's really entwined with their life. She's the one who's like egging Molly Ringwald on about that she needs to go to prom. And I was like, what a weird fucking thing to tell a kid. And then there's a line in the movie where she's hugging Molly Ringwald and she's like,
Oh, why can't we start old and get younger? I envy you. I really envy you.
Iona, you're gonna OD in nostalgia.
Yeah.
and I was like, this is John Hughes. I was
Yeah.
like, this is him.
Yeah. You're not that slick, honey.
Yeah.
Overall, watching the movie was fine enough.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I think like
I think the
it's-
stuff with her and Harry Dean Stanton's really great and holds
Yeah.
up and is maybe my favorite thing in the movie.
And that's the reason why her and the rich guy need to end up together, because they both have these parents who are, you know, like flimsy and like maybe unattentive and, you know, are not the parents they should be. And so you feel that. After Pretty in Pink, he makes Ferris Bueller's Day Off. I have a feeling we will talk about it later.
Yeah.
In 87, he does Some Kind of Wonderful, which he also passes off to
So this is what I was getting at. So the original ending of Pretty in Pink gets changed. He gets super mad at Howard Deutsch and he's like, we're not going to talk again, like he does with everybody else. But then the movie does incredibly well. They've already hired Martha Coolidge, who did Valley Girl, to direct Some Kind of Wonderful. He fucking gets rid of Martha Coolidge and replaces her with Howard Deutsch because he's such a box office draw now.
And this is the movie where literally he gets the like ending of the character ending up with the like nerdy outcast friend, which is fucking bonkers because it's like she's so fucking hot, like Mary Stuart Masterson in her like little haircut and her like fake really bad drum playing.
Yes. And that's a great cast. Eric Stoltz plays essentially the Molly Ringwald character. Mary Stuart Masterson plays the Ducky character. Leah Thompson plays the Blaine character.
Yeah,
I love Leah Thompson. She
Leah
goes
Thompson.
on. She goes on to marry Howard Deutsch, by the way. Yeah. But the kiss between Eric Stoltz and Mary Stuart Masterson, I had never seen Some Kind of Wonderful before.
Me either.
And it is kind of just a pale in comparison to Pretty in Pink. But that fucking kiss, I was like, this is hot.
Yeah,
guys.
Eric Stoltz does things for me in this movie. After this, John Hughes is trying to move away from the teen movies. This comes to an end of his teen era.
Yeah, he's like, bye teens, see you never.
Yeah, fuck teens. And so in 87, while Deutsch is making Some Kind of Wonderful, he is making Planes, Trains, and Automobiles with Steve Martin and John Candy. John Candy, who would essentially become his second era muse.
Yes.
And was like the stand-in for the like adult version of, you know, the high school artist who wanted to do art. And now it's kind of like, I am the everyman who life is hard sometimes and we're out of place and whatever.
Yeah.
I never seen Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. Saw it finally.
I will say too, I went even further in the research process of this. He also starts a working relationship with Chris Columbus, who will go on to direct the first two Home Alone movies. And because of that, for the first time ever, he produces a movie that he doesn't write or direct, and that's Chris Columbus's Only the Lonely. If you've not seen Only the Lonely, I fucking love that movie. It's a movie where John Candy is the romantic lead, and Ali Sheedy is the love interest. And apparently he demanded they cast Ali Sheedy because he was like, it's the handoff between my adult work and my teenage work.
But Only the Lonely comes out later in 91, though.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
So like he's still making like before that he's got.
Oh yeah. No, I'm not saying chronologically. I just wanted to mention Only the Lonely. You don't have to see it for John Hughes's oeuvre because he didn't have much of a hand in it. But I think if
I saw her.
Oh, nice.
It was fine.
Oh, how dare you?
Yeah, I said it there.
I'm replacing you with a plastic skeleton.
Honestly, chic. After that, famously, she's having a baby. We talked about it in the Kevin Bacon episode. I do not like this movie.
It's not great.
He loves this movie. This is him. Kevin Bacon is him. Whatever. It's pretty fucking, misogyny. The movie. Fragile white male. The movie. His second John Candy collaboration is The Great Outdoors. In '89, Uncle Buck and Christmas Vacation gets made. Uncle Buck, I saw for the first time. Again, the third combo with John Candy. But also, wait, isn't John Candy also in
Home Alone?
Vacation?
Oh yes, he's in Vacation. Sorry, but he's also in Home Alone, by the way. So
yeah, he's in a lot of them.
Yeah.
Uncle Buck, which is basically like again, it's Mr. Mom, but like instead of him being he's the uncle,
right? And this is the thing. This is the other thing that John Hughes gets accused of all the time. He rewrites his own stuff. Uncle Buck is Mr. Mom. Pretty in Pink is Some Kind of Wonderful. Home Alone is Dennis the Menace. Baby's Day Out. Like, the
best part of Uncle Buck is Macaulay Culkin and tiny little Gabby Hoffman.
Yes,
Gabby. And I was like watching the movie and I was like, I know this child. I famously hate child actors. Macaulay and Gabby are killer in this movie. Okay. And in this time period, we're doing like adult things, but also we're now getting into like, he's making these broad family comedies. So in 1990 though, fucking like Lid just rips off the house and Home Alone comes out. We talked about this for our Catherine O'Hara episode. At this time also, John Hughes has moved to LA and he fucking hates it. He fucking hates living in LA. He like keeps his house in Chicago. And now that I think about this, like I wonder if he says he hates LA just because like there's nothing that's not real life.
Right.
There's nothing real is out there. It's all fake. But now that I think about it, I wonder if it was just like too fucking like liberal for him,
yeah.
And so and truly this is like getting towards the end of his at least directing career, but like time in Hollywood, because he does not like schmoozing. He does not like I think after Home Alone, he was getting a lot of attention, more hands from bigger players wanting to assert control over his films, and he just was not going to play that game.
Yeah.
He was going to write, he was going to, do his thing, and it kind of ran away from him. And I think once that's out of the, like, especially back then, I think once it's out of the Pandora's box, you can't really put it back in.
And I think the other tiny bit of that too is he's receiving diminishing returns in terms of box office and criticism of his films. Dutch, a movie that he wrote, was accused of being just a Planes, Trains, and Automobiles ripoff, and his final film that he directs, Curly Sue, is savaged by reviewers
with good reason.
Oh, I'm not disagreeing, but
but so after Curly Sue, he stops directing. He decides, peace, motherfuckers, I'm going home. Moves back to the suburbs of Chicago. He literally buys this land and reforests it. He is still writing and his movies are still being produced. He just has let it go, Elsa. He's like, I'm not fucking around. But so, like I said earlier, he writes the Beethoven movies. He writes the Home Alone sequels. Dennis the Menace, Baby's Day Out, Miracle on 34th Street. He also writes 101 Dalmatians for Disney, and Flubber for Disney, which I did not know and watched the shit out of when I was a kid.
So I started making teen films because if I was going to direct, I wanted to make sure that I didn't have an actor say to me, you have no idea what you're doing, because I didn't. And I figured, well, maybe if they're like 15, they won't ask that question, or at least I can say to them, do you know what you're doing? And they wouldn't know either. So, it's all accidental. This is not, my career was not planned in any way. And so I went from Teen King to Kidmeister, and I don't know what's next.
He starts writing under a nom de plume.
Beethoven was one of his first. He wrote Beethoven under the pseudonym Edmond Dantes, the main character from The Count of Monte Cristo, who is a man who gets shipwrecked on an island and assumed dead for years, and then comes back under disguise to get his revenge. He writes Beethoven, Made in Manhattan.
So that kind of like comes to the end of his. I mean, his last credit is Drillbit Taylor, and it's, you know, it sucks. Of the two articles I posted on our Facebook, there's a Vanity Fair article that's pretty iconic. It was written the year after he died, and the writer, David Comp, he talked to John's sons and reveals, you know, just like 300 notebooks of writing, his wishes, his wants. He said and thought, you know, he'd be writing until he was 80 and making movies. And everyone you talk to, there's a bunch of interviews of people being like, I thought he was going to come back. I thought he was going to come back. Molly Ringwald had said, you know, we hadn't talked in so long, and I wrote him and he sent me a bunch of flowers. And so she thought, you know, there was some reconciliation, but literally he was visiting New York. I think his son was living here at the time to visit the grandkids, and he goes out for a walk, and he's not a block away from the hotel and has a heart attack. And you know, by the time he gets to the hospital, he's dead. He was 59.
Too young. That's too young for anybody to die.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and I think, you know, he has like. There's known screenplays that have gone unproduced, that were either in development, that fell apart. That New York Times Magazine article I wrote, they literally even say in the article, oh yeah, I'm working on this right now, Bartholomew versus Neff, which would have been a Sylvester Stallone and John Candy vehicle that never gets made. A live action Peanuts film. People thought that his like great return was going to be this movie called Tickets, which was going to be like teens waiting for free tickets for a farewell concert. That just never happens. So there's a wealth of unproduced writing that, you know, just known and unknown, you know, that we'll maybe never see. That kind of wraps up, you know, the life and work of John Hughes. He was a very particular filmmaker who loved his actors until he didn't. Who had a point of view that was very white, very straight, but also very defining of the generation. Because you have to think, like, these were the Reagan years, you know, like there's a reason why these were so successful. Like, there's a reason why in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, like, the only black people you see are like the ones that are dancing, you know, like it is. We were talking about this earlier. Like, when we were watching the Olivia de Havilland movies, we were like saying like, oh, it's of the time, you know, and so you can excuse some of the things. It's harder to do that now just because like the 80s was not that long ago.
Right. And it feels like these judgments that are being made aren't even from the 80s. They're left over from an earlier era, but they're being pumped through into an 80s world.
Right. But it also feels like he believed that America was like the heartland. Like, he believed that like the real America stuff was coming from, you know, the people that he knew. And I mean, and I think there's still some of that like feeling in studios where they're like, there's a reason why people think like, oh, we got to get like those middle America people to, you know, come out to watch our shows and movies. They're the ones who really like, you know, are the heartbeat of culture, which is fucking ridiculous. But all that being said, I do think, you know, there is a lot of charm and a lot of fun to be had. I just think it's super important to like be critical and understand that you know, this is not the real America.
Yeah. With that, I think we should move into our picks. I think that's a perfect place. So let's start with our 1-star reviews. it pains me to say this, not because of the content of the film or because of anything about it, but it has my favorite theme song of all the movies, and my pick is 1985's Weird Science.
Weird Science.
Yeah, Oingo Boingo, amazing. And that's the thing, you know, John Hughes was all about his music, and he knew the references. You know, John Candy's son said that like a month before John Hughes passed away, he gave him an iPod just filled with thousands of songs, and he loaned it back to the family for them to play at his funeral, which I think is so lovely.
And then I know, and then apparently he would do it all the time. He was giving out iPods,
like mixtapes, yeah, essentially. But to come back to Weird Science, we talked about it before. It's two nerds. They're pubescent, and they use their computer to Frankenstein a girl together through magic.
They literally watch Frankenstein.
They do. Colorized. Come on, guys.
Please.
Anyways, you know, she's played by Kelly LeBrock. I think her performance is really great in the movie. However, I think this movie is unrelentingly sexist. I think this is maybe the most racist of his movies. There's a scene where they, like, Lisa, the genie, played by Kelly LeBrock, brings them to a club, and Anthony Michael Hall, for the next 15 minutes, does, like, jive speak black impersonation.
Let me tell you my story, man. Last year, I was insane for this crazy little 8th grade bitch. Okay?
Crazy? Insane?
Insane? Crazy?
I was nuts for the woman, man. Now you gotta believe me. I'm serious. I'm telling the truth here. I'm speaking to you. I mean, I was nuts for the girl. And what did it to me was these big titties she had. For a 13-year-old girl, man, she wouldn't have had to worry about no titties for the rest of her life, boy. You know, she was set and she was looking good, son.
That's the truth, baby.
He does that bit a little bit in The Breakfast Club.
He does.
When he's high. And a part of me is like, did Anthony Michael Hall do this?
And people are like, this is hilarious.
Yeah, and they're like, put it in the film. Like, I can imagine John Hughes being like, this kid's a star. He can, like, do... Like,
you know what makes me even more incensed about that is that Stanley Kubrick, like, loved Anthony Michael Hall because of the John Hughes movies, and was like, he's the next Spencer Tracy, and was going to cast him in Full Metal Jacket, and he had to, like, the talks fell through. But I can't imagine, I'm just imagining Stanley Kubrick watching Weird Science and being like,
ooh, yes,
this is Spencer Tracy. Like,
yeah. Fucking psycho.
But anyways, so Lisa's there to teach them the lesson that, like, they should have more confidence in themselves, I guess, and that they should fuck the women they want to fuck because girls will like them, even though the girls kind of fall in love with them because they throw a big house party. Yeah. And there's I also forgot that there's, like, a really late third act car chase that the movie could totally live without, but I almost feel like was a studio note, just like something exciting needs to happen now.
Right.
I mean, that movie is basically just a couple of scenes strung together. It's also maybe the worst parents in, I mean, maybe not the worst parents, because I feel like Breakfast Club has some really horrific stories of parents, but like Gary's parents are, I have no idea what he was going for with them. Then there's Wyatt's grandparents who, like, have this really out of nowhere. They're also a third act edition. Like, they're just like, we need to make sure Wyatt isn't alone this weekend.
Who's playing Wyatt's brother who's an asshole?
So that is the late, great Bill Paxton. And he is also really great in the movie, I will say. Character of Chet Donnelly, who she turns into a turd monster at the end of the movie.
Turd monster.
Which is maybe my favorite thing in the entire film.
Would you please turn me back to normal, please? I haven't done anything to you.
No, but you've done plenty to your brother.
Like what?
Well, let me see. You've nagged him, harassed him, suppressed him, kept him in fear of you, extorted money from him.
It's done out of love.
And there's fun stuff in it, like any of the scenes where they're, like, making Lisa and all the magic, like all the, like, the dog on the wall barking, and I think some of that stuff is genuinely fun, but it's I I can't morally recommend this movie, and maybe moral's not the right word, but like, I don't know. This movie should have Kelly LeBrock, much like you were talking about Gone with the Wind, should have Kelly LeBrock come out at the beginning and be like, the 1980s were a different time.
This is like, yeah, and she needs to be like, you know, when Trump and all those fucking Republicans were talking about locker room talk, they're talking about this movie.
Yes, exactly.
Specifically. And it's like, but it's not fucking okay. Like, this is the movie that, like, talk to your fucking sons about like how to treat women,
right? And I think that's the most depressing thing about it is our two heroes, Gary and Wyatt, are supposed to be the stalwarts, but there's nothing based on their personalities that really separates them from, you know, the Robert Downey Jr. or the Robert Russler character, Ian and Max, who are their bullies.
And you know that because at the end they become friends to create a second genie woman. Like, they're the. And it's like, and yet, no matter what, if you're a nerd or not, you can come together with another white dude to talk about boners and boobs.
Yeah.
Like, it's fucking wild.
This movie wasn't incredibly well received, but it was well received enough. And Roger Ebert even called it, said the film was funnier and a little deeper than the predictable story it might have been. So like, I don't know. It's reception. It's like held as part of this John Hughes pantheon. And I think it's maybe considered nowadays one of the lesser ones, but I think it should be way pushed towards the back, which is unfortunate because I also, like, as a kid, I remember watching the TV show spinoff that ran for like 5 seasons with Vanessa Angel as the Lisa character.
Good pick, Gavin. My 1-star review, it is 1991's Curly Sue.
Yeah,
this movie is so bad, and I have a hard time with movies all the time that are like homelessness porn, you know?
Yeah.
Which is what this movie basically is. It's like cute girl, and there was a moment when James Belushi, as he is credited, it's Jim Belushi, they are homeless, and they explain in the movie that he had a one-night stand with a woman and he ends up with her baby. He's not even the real father.
Yeah, he's not the real father.
I guess she like leaves Curly Sue with him, and he is such a good guy. You just have to know that he's such a good guy. And they let you know in the movie over and over again, we don't steal, we lie when we have to, and we cheat when we have to, but we're good people. And they essentially are running scams, like, you know, to get food, and they collide with Alison Porter plays Curly Sue. Kelly Lynch plays the tough lawyer woman lady who loves her career and is ruthless. Except literally the minute she like runs into Curly Sue and Jim Belushi, she's like, oh, well, I guess I'll let you guys stay. Like, talk about a fucking like flimsy character. I was like, how dare you try and sell this woman off as like this hardened, no-hearted bitch, and then throw a child at her, and she's like immediately into it.
And she's such a caricature of that in her first scene.
And I just realized that case happens throughout the entire movie, and in the end,
does.
The gag of the end is that she has pictures of the husband with the pool boy. Dun dun dun. And
well, there's your gay character. Finally.
Finally. And it's very just like, she has a very awful kind of boyfriend, I guess, who is like, what are these urchins doing here at our snooty patooty place? And she's like, no, but, and it's the movie just sucks. Like, I think Curly Sue, the actress and character, are very charming, but the politics of this movie are very weird.
Yeah.
And it's like, of course, I cannot wrap my head around this woman who is falling in love. She's either falling in love with Jim Belushi's homeless character, or she is very concerned about the well-being of this child, because like they try and pass it off as like, well, is Curly Sue being educated? Is she going to school?
Right.
Oh, she can't read. Oh no.
What's going on?
Well, I'm recuperating.
Knock it off. What are you doing with that little girl?
What do you mean?
Has she ever been to school?
Well, briefly from time to time.
She's completely ignorant.
She's not ignorant.
She's illiterate.
That's not ignorant.
You're using her, aren't you?
No, ma'am.
Liar. You use her in your little cons. It's pathetic. It's criminal.
Guess it's time to go.
And then the ending is like, they do this very very gratuitous, painful plot twist of like, she thinks that he has left, and
it's cruel. It is cruel.
It's fucking cruel. Like the lawyer woman lady, she's like, your dad left you this letter, and Curly Sue's crying, and she thinks that the dad has left, and she opens the fucking letter, and it says, go to the living room. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, not only did Jim's Belushi character think to do this cruelty on this child, but then, like, the woman love interest is like, yeah, let's do that. It's gonna be so fun. Like, right. What the fuck?
And, like, I don't know how it fits into his political beliefs, but there's a whole thing you could say about, like, Jim Belushi's character surviving because he's pulling himself up by his bootstraps.
Oh, yeah,
and, like,
he gets the job.
Yeah.
And that's what's also wild, because literally she's like, you have to get a job and you have to, like, take care of this girl. And literally in one scene, he, like, goes to a factory and gets a job, and I was like, this man didn't do that before just cuz?
Right.
Like, he likes being homeless? Like, that's fucking
and
wild.
that's a very conservative. That's
yeah,
a very, like,
see, he just tried and it happened. Like, you fucking psycho. Yeah, Curly Sue, not good. Also, but I will say, the first movie that Steve Carell's in.
Yes.
For 1 second, one scene.
Fun, weird fact about that movie. He really wanted Christina Ricci for Curly Sue after seeing her in Mermaids, and I cannot see it. I cannot see it.
She's too good for it.
Yeah. But good pick, Louis.
Also, Alison Porter won a season of The Voice, apparently, very recently, who plays Curly Sue.
Oh, yes. I did read that, yeah. Was there anything else you saw that you didn't particularly like?
So we didn't talk about this movie, but I did see Career Opportunities, which is a movie that he tried to, like, get his name off, detach himself from. He had written this. The studio was like, bitch, we're making it. It was post Home Alone. It stars Frank Whaley and Jennifer Connelly. It's very psycho.
I've not seen it in years, but I have very fond memories of Jennifer Connelly in that movie. So I mean, I'm sure it's awfully sexist.
It is. She literally is like, I'm rich and I don't know what to do. My daddy's crazy.
I remember her writing one of those, like, kids.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She later says that she was pissed off because all of the marketing was just her writing a kid's pony horse thing.
Yep.
Very sexually.
It's what I remember the most in the movie. I was a terrible human being.
No, I mean, yeah.
It worked. Sex sells, kids. I've made my feelings clear about the Home Alone movies. You can hear them in the Catherine O'Hara episode.
Same.
And you couldn't pay me to watch Beethoven. You really couldn't. Also, weird fact about that movie, that when I was going through all of this, Charles Grodin was in his late 50s in that movie, and he's married to Bonnie Hunt, who's 29 in the film, and it's never mentioned.
Wow. Well, I did not rewatch Beethoven, but I remember as a kid loving Beethoven.
Yeah, I'm sure I did too. I can't. Yeah, that basically his late career. I mostly avoided.
I loved Beethoven. I loved Dennis the Menace. I loved Flubber. They were just like kid movies that I guess, I don't know, he had the formula, but I imagine watching them now would be a challenge. But who knows?
Anyways, let's get out of here and let's get into our 5-star reviews.
My 5-star review, for all the shit that I talked in the rewind, and like I guess we're being a little negative, but for all of that, like, Ferris Bueller's Day Off fucking slaps, and I love that movie. I love Ferris Bueller's Day Off so much, yeah, I knew before that this was going to be my 5-star review, even though I think there are a lot of like good movies to pick from. I just knew. I think Matthew Broderick is a star. so charming. I cannot imagine anyone else in the role, even though there were a lot of people who were considered.
Yeah.
Michael J. Fox was considered, Jim Carrey, John Cusack, Tom Cruise were all considered. But God, Matthew Broderick is so hot in this movie. He's so charming. Like, he, to me, in my little like teenager eyes, was just like, oh my God, I want to be like everyone wanted to be Ferris. This was, and the thing that breaks Ferris Bueller's Day Off out of like the John Hughes-verse is that this is about a kid who everyone loves unironically, and he is genuinely a nice guy. You know, he's kind of a rascal, but he doesn't hurt anyone.
Right.
He's not like motivated by sex. He literally is motivated by taking time out of the day to enjoy yourself and being there for your friends. And I also love this movie because he's the only person I know that could fucking pull off the breaking the fourth wall. Like Phoebe Waller, like it's so good.
The key to faking out the parents is the clammy hands. It's a good non-specific symptom. I'm a big believer in it. A lot of people will tell you that a good phony fever is a deadlock, but you get a nervous mother, you could wind up in a doctor's office. That's worse than school. You fake a stomach cramp, and when you're bent over, moaning and wailing, you lick your palms. It's a little childish and stupid, but then so is high school.
And what I think is great about this movie too is it's the ultimate distillation of that sort of like. John Hughes has some really weird instincts when he's a director. Very heavy on sound effects, very heavy on like almost cartoony gags. And I think, you know, for every time it doesn't really work in 16 Candles, it really works here because, as you mentioned, these movies that he's making are fairy tales, and that's and I think Ferris Bueller's the most, you know, idyllic fairy tale of them all. Except that you usually get some sort of moral at the end of a fairy tale, and Ferris Bueller doesn't really get any sort of comeuppance. In fact, I mean, he teaches morals to his friends.
Yes, and he like, and I think beyond that, like, and maybe that's like why this movie stands out, because he's literally talking directly to us, the audience. He says, and the reason why I think I really love this movie so much is because he is able to, at the end, look at us and say, see, like, I was able to do the thing and it's okay in the end. It's fine. Even though my sister hated me at the beginning of this and was out to get me, you know, we're family and we're able to take a breath and just really enjoy this beautiful, gorgeous day, enjoy our company, enjoy my friends' friendship, my girlfriend. Like, I do also think that fucking Cameron is the beating heart of this movie, though. Like, the soul of this movie is in his best friend
Alan Ruck
Cameron.
is pitch perfect.
Yeah.
See, this should give you like. I also think, in a weird way, Alan Ruck is really hot in this movie, and maybe that says a lot about me. Maybe that says.
Derek said the same thing. I was like, "Oh, Matthew Broderick's so hot." He was like, "What about Cameron?" I was like, "What about Cameron, babe?" Like.
I mean, let my Cameron go, you know?
Alan Ruck, he's 29 in this movie playing a teenager. And he said he was very like worried about not being cool or hip, but it like works so well. And I think Cameron is the funniest part of this movie when he's at the stock exchange doing the like throwing his little hands, and like when they're in Wrigley Field just doing swing, bada bada swing. It's so good. And kind of what you were saying about these other movies where it's just like scenes strung together. This is what this movie is, but it works so well. It works so well because you can feel the relationships, you can feel like the love, you can feel the stakes. I understand. I'm always the Cameron when like someone is getting into tonterías and I'm like, don't, and like, and then it's like. And then, like, it's fine. And then, like, oh, this is better. It's like Derek when we're, like, going to go see a show. And he's like, no, it's fine. Let's just go. No one's sitting here. Let's go. I'm like, babe, these are our seats. We cannot go. And then he forces me to do the thing. And I'm like, oh, this is better. And we're fine. Like, And like the worst thing that could happen is someone says like, hey, go back to your seat. And like, okay, fine.
Right.
And I just truly the joy of, and also just like the one-liners, the zingers, the delivery of Matthew Broderick's lines. This movie was made on a $5.8 million budget. It received $70 million in box office. And he, again, shot so much of this movie, like tons and tons of tape, edited it a million different ways, because guess what? They're wearing the same thing the entire movie. And so originally the museum scene was after the parade scene, and realized the parade scene is just like the big, most fun part of the movie. So they had to move that around. But the best part of the movie, the most emotionally satisfying part of the movie, hands down, and I think anyone will say this, is in the end when Cameron realizes he needs to stand up to his parents, talk to them, force them to come to grips with the emotional torture that he's been feeling. And that car, she is gone with the wind.
She is. I will say the one last thing I want to mention before we move on is Jeffrey Jones, who it turns out is a terrible person as well.
Yes.
But Jeffrey Jones, Edward R. Rooney, who's the principal, who's after him, is maybe the most grotesque, most monstrous of the adults in any of his movies.
Yes.
Jeffrey Jones is pitch perfect, but too bad that he's also a monster in real life.
Jennifer Grey is also pitch perfect as when she says,
yes,
I have a loaded gun and a scorching case of herpes. God, like there is no part in that movie that is wasted, no line that is thrown away. It's just so good. It's the perfect day off movie. Like it truly just brings me so much joy. What did you pick, Gavin?
So I also picked one of his Edie McClurg movies, as I like to call them.
Edie McClurg?
Edie McClurg, who was the administrative assistant to...
I was just about to... Yes.
1 year later, she's in a little film called Planes, Trains, and Automobiles in 1987.
Okay.
In which she plays a car rental person. And
what's the iconic line, Gavin? I was thinking about this. We haven't done this bit in a while, but she said what?
She said,
and I really don't care for the way your company left me in the middle of fucking nowhere with fucking keys to a fucking car that isn't fucking there. And I really didn't care to fucking walk down a fucking highway and across a fucking runway to get back here to have you smile in my fucking face. I want a fucking car right fucking now.
May I see your rental agreement?
I threw it away.
Oh, boy.
Oh, boy, what?
You're fucked.
And the funny thing is the only direction she was given before that, that was her line. But the only direction she was given before that was like, be too busy on the phone to notice him. And she improv that whole scene. And he was like,
iconic.
He was like, how did you come up with that? And she's like, I just took a page from your book. It was all stuff I knew.
Yeah. She's so iconic in that role and in Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
I love her so much. All praise to Edie McClurg.
So good.
But I will say, Planes, Trains, and Automobile is literally, it's a road movie. It's the John Hughes reinvention of a road movie. Steve Martin plays Neil Page. He's an account executive. He's on a business trip from New York, trying to get back to Chicago for Thanksgiving in 2 days. He runs into
Kevin Bacon.
Kevin Bacon, yeah. Which is really funny, by the way. So there's this whole interconnected John Hughes-averse, by the way. And the scene when he's in the airport, when he eventually gets to the airport and they're announcing the delays, in the background, you can hear the airport fight from She's Having a Baby. Yeah.
Oh, wow. You guys couldn't hear it, but my jaw just dropped.
But anyways, he runs into John Candy Del Griffith, who sort of becomes his bad luck charm. He's this other man who's trying to get across country to get home for Thanksgiving. Suspicious. And it's sort of this series of unfortunate events, and the movie is literally, planes, trains, and automobiles. They can't get on a plane. Well, they do get on a plane. It gets rerouted to Kansas. From Kansas, they try and get back to Chicago. They take a train. They get in a car. Everything that can go wrong will go wrong. There's also those like really John Hughesy moments of like surrealism. I don't know. There's something so funny about the combination of I think this is really Steve Martin working at the height of his like this is the era in which Steve Martin is like moving away from the man with two brains and moving more towards eventually, you know, like you see in Father of the Bride,
Right,
the more
right.
adult,
Totally.
more reserved. And at the same time, John Candy is his foil, but I think there's a way that you could look at John Candy and be like, he's a monster because he keeps ruining everything for Steve Martin, even though Steve Martin's really the monster and really like, you know,
I
he's
mean,
super
I'll
uptight.
tell you what, honey. I thought they were both monsters. I will be very vulnerable and honest and say that I did not enjoy this movie as much. And it was weird because as I was, and I want to hear the discourse, because as I was watching this, I was like, okay, this is verging on bad behavior that I should be getting over, like bad behavior person who I should like not be judging. And I was like, wait, what's going on here?
Well, I mean, I definitely think there's an element of that, and I do, but I think the one thing that John Hughes is good at doing is really creating that third dimension that makes them realistic. And I think that there's enough scenes in the film in which Steve Martin's like, you know what? I am an asshole and I am treating you like an asshole and maybe I should be a little more open. And there's enough scenes where John Candy's like, you know what? I'm being an asshole. I'm the guy that like goes in and I smother my friends and I realize like I'm too much.
Right.
And
there's that great scene where he says, you know, they're at the hotel and he says,
you want to hurt me? Go right ahead if it makes you feel any better. I'm an easy target. Yeah, you're right. I talk too much. I also listen too much. I could be a cold-hearted cynic like you. But I don't like to hurt people's feelings. Well, you think what you want about me. I'm not changing. I like me. My wife likes me. My customers like me. Because I'm the real article. What you see is what you get.
I did get the feeling of like, oh, he's walking this line.
Yes.
But the whole time I just kept thinking like, just stop, like enough.
But the other factor you have to include in there is that they don't have time to stop. They don't like they're both in a constant state of panic, even though, and I'm not going to spoil anything, but even though John Candy is maybe not necessarily in as much of a rush as Steve Martin is. But
I clocked that twist ending.
I love that ending and I love how sweet it is. And you know, it's as stupid as it is when the power ballad of Every Time You Go Away kicks in. I'm like, you know what? I'm like, yeah.
No, I am a Lady Gaga Blackpink sour candy. I was like, no. And I think this is also something that I wanted to bring up. I think a lot of John Hughes' movies end like, it's almost like you bust your load and it's like, and it's over. Like, it's like,
I don't mind that. Well, I mean, some of my favorite horror movies are the Hammer horror films from the 60s that literally just end. Like their version of Phantom of the Opera, the chandelier falls and credits. And I was just like, you know what? Brilliant. You know, Dracula dies, we're done. No closure. You don't need it. You know?
I just like, there were parts of me where I was like, Molly Ringwald kisses Jake Ryan and then credits. Like that's it. I was like, yeah. It's, you know, they leave detention, credits. Like there's no resolution of like talking to the parents or whatever. And maybe like that's not the point, but like it's always just so quick. Like the endings for me always feel a little bit rushed and not quite like we just went on a fucking emotional roller coaster ride. Well, and it's like zoom.
It is really funny too, because he is such a character writer and whatnot. Mm-hmm. And then at the very end, it's suddenly like, and the plot stopped. And I get where you're coming from, that like when you spend so much time focused on character and suddenly you realize like, oh shit, there is a plot to this movie and it's done. And now I feel, but I think that's, you know, he said very early on in his career, he was watching these movies and a character would die and it would affect him immensely, and he didn't want that for these films. And or he's watching a film and a person gets violently attacked and it really upsets him and he doesn't want that. And I think that's what he's like, I'm gonna get out when the getting's good.
And I get hit a lot of time for having sentimental endings, and I do it deliberately. And I choose not to. At some point I depart from reality and say, okay, look, this is what I would want to feel. Life doesn't always come out, movies can.
I think it's also his most adult film. It's sort of the beginning of his adult films, and I think it's much more, I guess by adult I mean mature, than something like She's Having a Baby.
I was not immune to the charms of Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. There are some really fun, like ridiculous moments, like in the car with the fire. Is that the movie? No, I'm thinking of something else.
You're probably thinking of Dutch.
I didn't watch Dutch, so
I also have a soft spot for Dutch, but I do understand that it is the lesser of the two. But those are both great Thanksgiving movies, by the way. There aren't that many Thanksgiving movies, so
there's not. You're right.
Yeah.
Was there anything else that you want to mention in our 5-star realm? Things that you liked that you want to mention real quick?
Am I a monster if I say no?
Bitch, you might be.
I really tangentially I really like Only the Lonely, which is very little John Hughes influence. I had a hard time. I had a hard time.
In the spirit of John Hughes, is there anything like nostalgia wise that like brings up, even though the movie might not hold up, but like you have good memories of or fond of? Like...
I mean, I was very fond of Uncle Buck growing up. I really was. And I did, Breakfast Club is fine. It's fine. Like it's I will go one further and say that Breakfast Club is very emotionally affecting. I think that I rewatched and I was like, the monologues that like Emilio Estevez is particularly very affecting. He's this jock who commits this act of violence for no reason other than to impress his father, and it's very powerful. And I was like, man, and it's hard to like feel bad or sad for some fucking white jock dude, but like you do feel the pain. And I think it's also impressive because you don't hear that often. You don't hear the story of like, I don't know. You don't get to get into that world. He knows his characters. He really, really does. Say what you will about him. And, and I know I'm coming off like a negative Nancy. I do like Mr. Mom too, as I mentioned, but once again, I still hate that ending. But yeah, I don't know. He was such a prolific writer, and he could write a character out of nothing. I just wish there was more.
Right. I do think these are very interesting relics of people like saying like these are capsules of the 80s. I don't think that's correct. I think these are capsules of like white, straight, like, America that it's very narrow because it completely ignores a lot of what was happening in the 80s. Like there was a lot happening in the 80s culture-wise that was not these movies.
Yeah.
These movies do capture the music, capture some of the kind of outlandish fashions, the teen angst of it all. I do get that. There is some like fun to be had in watching Some Kind of Wonderful. Like there is something there. I don't think it's like the best movie, but like it's really funny to see, Mary Stuart Masterson just being like, I'm a rock and roll girl, and I just like I'm in love with my like soft painter boy. Like it is, there is entertainment value there, but again, like we've said, it's just you cannot romanticize these movies because they are not real, and they only contributed to the like this fake thing of like how prom needs to be a certain way, and you need to fuck girls by a certain time, and you have to go to New York and spend $10 billion to have a good time. So like knowing that, it's like, do I have fun watching Home Alone? I do, but like I can't pay attention too much to like getting underneath it, and that's the same thing for a lot of these movies. But like they are relics of what white people wanted us to believe the 80s were, but it's not real. It's a fantasy. And so if you go into these movies thinking this is a fantasy, a white fantasy, a straight fantasy, you'll have some fun. Anyway.
I know. I think that sums it up perfectly. So before we get into our fast forward, why don't we do our mixed reviews review?
My 1-star review was 1991's Curly Sue.
And my 1-star review was 1985's Weird Science.
My 5-star review was 1986's Ferris Bueller's Day Off.
And my 5-star review was 1987's Planes, Trains, and Automobiles. I'm not winning that poll.
Bitch, I might.
So now that we're in our fast forward, it's once again hard to do a fast forward for somebody who has passed away. And I think you actually summarized him completely well. But I do want to say it is interesting to see what sort of happened after his movies. Molly Ringwald famously was offered the role of Sidney Prescott in Scream, and she turned it down because she was 28 at the time. And she's like, I don't want to be that older person playing a teen forever, which is funny because she was only 4 years older than the oldest other teen in the movie.
Right.
But I think then you see something like the American Pie movies come along, and those are more sort of the return to the Porky's sort of formula. And then on the reverse side of that, the quote unquote independent, boom of the 2000s come in, and you get the other, the more extreme, like Welcome to the Dollhouse, the Todd Solondz of the world. But then, and I don't know. I think he left an interesting, like, his impact was really his teen movies, and I think
right.
Like those created the shockwaves that led to these other things that eventually come out.
Well, yeah. I mean, you get like in the later 90s, early aughts, there was this little mini boom of teen movies like She's All That, 10 Things I Hate About You, and so many more that were riding in that same lane. That were speaking to this generation, and I don't want to undersell that. In the mid 80s, these movies spoke to that generation. They were,
right.
and no one believed in him. Like, no one thought Breakfast Club was going to be a hit.
Right.
No one thought these movies were going to be
they
as big as they were.
They thought it had just enough to make money, and that's
right.
that's really what the film business is. My niece, who's 21 now, she's almost 22. She's a month away from 22. Oh my God, I'm ancient. She was born in 98, and I don't know if she's seen any of these movies, and
right.
I don't think they have any effect on her, and I'm curious to see like where that legacy goes, because I also don't think she's seen like any of the American Pie films or really cares about them, and
well, yeah, I mean, I think like moving further into time, when people think of like more recent classic teen movies, you think of like, I don't know, like Mean Girls, that type of stuff.
And she definitely knows Mean Girls, and she can do that, we
right.
wear pink on Wednesday. And
but I think and maybe there is something there moving the needle towards, I don't know, more like less conservative takes. But like I think John Hughes, he in this article in Vanity Fair, he talked about wanting to try making a musical, try doing, straight dramas. He was going to be older and doing things that were way away from, these teen things. And because all of the movies, all of the movies have these characters who are like outside looking in, which just me saying that is like, fuck, is Dear Evan Hansen like a fucking John Hughes movie, like musical? Like, it might fucking be. It's literally straight
Bitch,
white
it
people. It's straight white people complaining about like you're not fitting in. And don't come for me because I kind of like it. Lol. But I do think his impact on culture is significant, and the formula works for a reason. And it's probably because he was one of the first people to look at teenagers and treat them with respect, treat them
right.
as fully formed humans that mattered, treating their wants and needs as something that, is important.
It's got a universal appeal. And like, that's why I say, like, I know Like, I do know queer people that have imprinted on it, and I do know
Yes.
people of color who have imprinted on it. And
because it's
like,
so easy to. It's so
right.
easy to
Exactly.
implant, like, you know, to imprint an experience of a queer person disappointing mom and dad because they are queer, and making that connection to, you know, literally any of the characters in Breakfast Club, you know, whether it's Anthony Michael Hall not delivering the grades, you know, Emilio Estevez not winning sports thing. Like, we all can feel that disappointment through these characters. And so hopefully, like, the legacy of that, though, is, I mean, I think teen movies now have kind of all migrated to Netflix, literally, like, all have migrated to Netflix. But the beautiful thing about that is, like, there are now POCs and queers, and it's now we're able to have those stories, but actually told through the lens of, you know, these different colors. It's not, we can take off our fucking rose colored glasses looking at John Hughes and put on our fucking, like, rainbow colored glasses and, like, see ourselves in media. And so for as problematic as John Hughes is, it's like, I guess we have to fucking start somewhere.
Well said. I mean, I have nothing else to add to that.
I mean, this is a white man that was wearing a fucking mullet, okay, and chain smoking for the most of his life, okay? So, like, we should have known. We should have known.
We should have known. I mean, in the 80s, white people could get away with anything.
This is the man that kept saying, "Oh, I love Chicago," and then just kept showing us the fucking suburbs. I was like, okay, well, sure, this is your Chicago, bud, I guess. I love Chicago. Chicago's the best. And it's like, you only go in to fucking go to the Cubs games or whatever.
So I think that wraps up John Hughes perfectly. I think his career will continue to live on. It'll be curious to see, you know, 20 to 30 years down the line, what sort of impact he's having. But it is, you know, I think you said it beautifully by saying you got to start somewhere.
I said that Don't You Forget About Me is my second favorite. Do you want to know my first favorite music moment?
I do.
It's
Reveal
literally
it.
It's literally the end of Bueller's Day Off. Just like boom 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 boom, like it's just
boom boom.
Yeah. It's so, and then like and literally to the point of like you cannot leave the credits. You have to listen to the entire song, and then Ferris Bueller comes on. You're still here? What are you doing? I was like, huh?
Well, Louis, I'm still gonna play us out with "Don't You Forget About Me."
You piece of shit. I'm never talking to you again. We're not working together ever again. I'm like John Hughes.
But anyways, we'll be back in 2 weeks. Thank you, everyone, for listening. If you want to find us online, you can find us on Twitter at The Mixed Reviews.
We're also on Facebook. Just type in The Mixed Reviews.
You can email us at reviewsmixed@gmail.com.
We're also on Instagram.
And you can subscribe to us on every major podcast app. We're on Apple, Stitcher, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon. We are on all of them. And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts, go there, leave us a 5-star review, and tell us what you think about the show. Make it nice. We'll read it on the show.
Make it nice. We made
Make
it nice.
We'll be back in 2 weeks.
Yes.
And with another movie subject.
Yeah, stay safe. Keep fighting the power. Rage on. Our girls won big at the Emmys yesterday.
They did.
Rest in power, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and register to vote.
Absolutely.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Don't you forget about me.